For Barron Trump, a normal excursion descended into disaster when a simple flight became a public spectacle. However, none anticipated the next tempest. When Melania arrived, a final boarding call reverberated through the busy terminal of John F. Kennedy International Airport, and Barron Trump was seated close to Gate 12. In an attempt to fit in with the group of people hurrying to catch their flights at 17, he kept his head down and scrolled through his phone while his tall form folded into a chair that appeared too small for his stature. Despite leading a very unusual life, he had perfected the art of remaining anonymous in public, but today was going to put that skill to the test. An elderly guy with sharp features and a frustrated demeanor approached the gate agent area, and his gaze fell on Barron. Someone in the priority boarding area seemed offended by the teenager's distant manner, and the agent's voice broke through the background commotion to say, "Excuse me, young man," in a suspicious tone. "Are you sure you're in the right boarding group?" Startled but composed, Barron looked up and said, "Yes, I am. I have a first-class ticket." The agent looked at him closely for a time, his eyes darting to Barron's phone, his casual sweatshirt, and his sneakers. His voice was steady but kind, and his upbringing was evident. "Can I see your ticket?" Barron paused. Even though he had previously been picked out for no apparent reason, there was something unusual about this man's tone. More combative, he handed over his boarding pass with his name prominently displayed on the screen. The agent read aloud Barron Trump, pausing as his expression changed but refusing to back down. Instead, his demeanor hardened, and the other passengers started to pay attention to their whispers and low hum of curiosity. A moment later, the agent returned flanked by a supervisor and said firmly, "There seems to be an issue with your ticket. You'll need to step aside while we sort this out." Barron felt the heat rise in his cheeks, but he maintained a neutral demeanor. Barron scowled. "What's the problem?" "I made this reservation weeks ago, and the supervisor intervened." "We're taking care of it, sir." The situation wasn't about to de-escalate, it was just getting started. As Barron reluctantly moved aside, he could feel the stares of other passengers. Some of them had taken out their phones to record the exchange, and the murmurs became louder. His frustration simmered, but he bit his tongue because he didn't want to cause a scene. Leaning against a nearby column, Barron observed the other passengers boarding without any problems. The gate staff's looks and the crowd's whispers grew more intense as he moved his weight from one foot to the other. I couldn't tell what was taking so long. Was it his last name, or was there another factor at play? The supervisor returned after a few minutes, his face still grim, saying, "We're unable to verify your identity through the system. Do you have another form of identification?" He wasn't the kind to jump to conclusions, but this was beginning to feel personal. Barron furrowed his brow and said, "My passport is in my carry-on bag." "You didn't even check it." The supervisor was obviously taken aback by the sensible statement, but rather of renouncing, he doubled down, "Sir, this isn't just about ID. There are processes that we must adhere to." Barron asked in a cool but disbelieving tone. "What protocols have allowed me to pass through this airport numerous times without any problems?" "You're not being singled out," but the expression in his eyes betrayed him when the gate agent from earlier interrupted, saying, "We've had some irregularities lately." A few close passengers started whispering among themselves because Barron didn't believe it either. The supervisor ignored the woman in her late 40s who was carrying a toddler on her hip and said, "What's the problem?" "He's just a kid with a ticket. Let him board. She was told to wait here while we conducted a further review, and if she didn't comply, we would have to escalate the matter." Barron repeated, "I haven't done anything wrong. So why are you getting so angry?" His patience is wearing thin. 2 airport security guards showed up, and Barron's chest constricted, not out of fear, but out of sheer shock at how rapidly things were getting out of control. The officers stood on either side of him, their presence attracting even more attention, and phones were out now, recording every second. "Please come with us, sir," one of them said calmly. "We just need to ask you a few questions." After exhaling and grabbing his carry-on bag, Barron followed them into a small, antiseptic area close to the gate, with the camera flashes and voices behind him like a storm cloud. The officers requested him to seat at a table inside, and as one of them started looking through his passport, the air felt heavier and colder. This is absurd. Barron, the more they questioned, the more Barron felt the weight of an unconscious bias in the room. However, Barron was unaware that someone else was already on her way, and she wasn't happy in the back seat of a black SUV navigating through Dallas traffic. Melania Trump sat poised with her phone in hand. "We're just following protocol, son," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head to one of the officers. After her son's flight, she had intended to make a brief journey to the airport to surprise him, but her expression changed from calm to worried as her phone buzzed with a barrage of text messages and social media alerts. One message, "Something's going on with Barron at the airport, people are posting videos," caught her attention. Her fingers flew across the screen, bringing up a brief clip that showed Barron surrounded by security guards and being LED away from the gate. She played it twice, her brow furrowing deeper with each pass. "Driver, please hurry," she said in a cool but firm voice. Meanwhile, Barron sat in the small room at the airport, staring at the blank wall in front of him. After the officers left to check his credentials, he was left to ponder in silence, unsure of what to do or who to call. The supervisor from earlier entered the room with his hands resting on the table, tapping lightly in a rhythm he wasn't even aware he was making. "We're still working on clearing up the situation," he said, avoiding eye contact. "How much longer?" Barron asked sharply. "You've had all my information for almost an hour." The supervisor hesitated, then muttered something about procedures once more before backing away. Barron let out a frustrated sigh and ran a hand through his hair, realizing that this was about more than just a ticket or ID. Something seemed to be farther away from the terminal. Melania arrived at the curb with her SUV. She strode through the airport with her heels clicking against the polished floor, her posture commanding despite her modest attire. She didn't need to make an announcement. People just moved aside as she approached the gate where the incident had taken place, and she was greeted by a flurry of whispers and murmurs. She was immediately recognized by the passengers, and some even indicated the direction where security had taken Barron. "Excuse me," she said to an airline employee nearby. "Where is my son?" The attendant blinked in shock at how direct her inquiry was. "Ma'am, let me check." Melania didn't hold out for an answer. When she saw the chamber where Barron was being held, she stepped forward, her eyes searching for any trace of him. She accelerated her speed and arrived at the door as the two officers were about to return to Barron. They paused upon seeing her, their faces displaying a mixture of surprise and trepidation. "What's going on here?" she said, her voice calm but bearing a weight that required a response. "Miss Trump," one officer started to stammer, but she broke off her cold stare, saying, "This is just standard protocol. The supervisor showed up behind her, his face pallid, and said, "You are keeping my son in a small room without any explanation. What kind of protocol is this?" "Miss Trump, this is all really a miscommunication. We were attempting to confirm that there was a misunderstanding on his ticket." Her tone sharpened, but her voice stayed calm. The room went silent, the tension so great that it seemed like time had stopped, but this silence wouldn't last long because Melania was going to demand answers that they couldn't give. Her gaze didn't waver as she stood in the doorway, her presence commanding the room. "Do you treat all passengers this way, or just the ones you choose to single out?" Barron looked at his mother, his relief evident but controlled as he sat up straighter in his chair and his shoulders stopped hunching. "Please realize that we were only attempting to make sure everything was in order when Mrs. Trump, the supervisor, stammered with beads of sweat on his brow. This is not appropriate." Melania cut her off as abruptly as the room fell silent. "You had his name, his passport, and his ticket. What more do you require?" "A formal request to board the aircraft." The manager winced but made an effort to get better. His name was flagged in the system, necessitating further investigation. The cops exchanged uncomfortable looks as Melania cocked her head slightly and pressed her lips into a thin line that was flagged because he was my kid or because someone thought he didn't belong in first class today. Everyone in the room sensed the tension as one of the officers cleared his throat, "Which is regular protocol, ma'am." Neither wanted to be the first to react. Melania's eyes narrowed. "So this is about his last name." The supervisor opened his lips to object, stating that we didn't know of his relationship to you until just now. However, she stopped him with a raised hand, saying, "Save your excuses. I want to speak to someone in charge." The man paused, but then nodded, leaving the room to make a call. Melania looked at Barron, her face softening as she walked up to him. "Are you okay?" she murmured softly, resting a hand on his shoulder. Melania gave his shoulder a comforting squeeze as Barron responded, his voice firm but laced with annoyance. "Yeah, I'm fine, they've just been wasting my time." She spoke in a calm, steady voice before going back to the officers to clarify anything. "My son has been degraded by you in front of numerous others. This concerns respect, or the absence of it, rather than routine or processes." One of the officers moved uneasily. For the first time, she raised her voice a little and said, "Mrs. Trump, we'll make this right and make sure he boards the next flight. This is about accountability." The supervisor returned with a higher-ranking airport official, saying, "I don't want apologies whispered behind closed doors. I want them where they belong, out there where this all started. I recognize that there has been a miscommunication, but Melania blatantly ignored the official's hand gesture. He started by promising that we will review the event and take the necessary action." The room seemed to shrink as everyone waited for the official to act. A few moments later, the supervisor returned with a laptop. The grainy footage showed Barron at the gate sitting quietly before being approached by the gate agent. Melania echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Does that include addressing the staff who escalated this without cause or reviewing the footage that shows exactly how this began?" The official paled, "But we can definitely pull up the footage, ma'am." "Do it now," she said firmly. From the pointless interrogation to the mounting anxiety that resulted in Barron's dismissal, Melania turned to the supervisor after watching the video in silence, her face unreadable. The supervisor, who was now visibly shaken, led the way back to the boarding gate. Melania walked beside him, her stride measured and unyielding, with Barron following closely behind. The tension in the terminal was almost tangible as passengers who had witnessed the earlier commotion experienced it. "You owe my son a public apology." "Of course," the man stammered. "We'll address it right away," Melania said, but Melania wasn't done yet. "We're still lingering," their interest piqued by the teenager and his mother's unexpected reappearance as they arrived at the gate. The supervisor moved forward, cleared his throat, and spoke to the assembly. Although his voice faltered a little, he persisted, "Ladies and gentlemen." The supervisor looked at Melania, whose steady gaze encouraged him to continue. "I want to make it clear," he said, his voice firming up. "I would like to take a moment to apologize for a situation that occurred earlier today. A misunderstanding involving one of our passengers, Mr. Barron Trump, led to actions that were unnecessary and inappropriate." A murmur went through the crowd, with some passengers exchanging looks of surprise and others nodding in agreement. That there was nothing wrong with this young man. "We sincerely apologize for any inconvenience caused by the situation, which was solely the result of an error on our part." And discomfort brought on by Barron stood silently with his hands in his pockets and a neutral expression, but deep down he felt the weight of the situation, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel inferior in public, when Melania came forward and attracted everyone's attention in the gate area. "Thank you for your words," she said in a measured but determined tone, "but words alone cannot express how deeply this goes beyond my son. It is about the idea of treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their identities or origins." The room went silent as her words sliced through the atmosphere like a razor. "Despite having a name that attracts attention, my son is a young man who deserves to be treated fairly, just like every other traveler in this airport. Let this serve as a reminder to all of us to consider our actions before taking them and to keep in mind that respect is earned by our shared humanity rather than by our status." The airport briefly buzzed with a renewed sense of excitement as the throng burst into applause, with some travelers even rising in support. The supervisor bowed his head, his face flushed with shame. As the ovation died down, a woman carrying a kid came up to Barron and Melania, not out of condemnation or division but out of solidarity. She continued softly, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what you went through. It wasn't right." Melania grinned politely, her eyes glowing. "Thank you," she said, "that means a lot." As the gate area started to calm down, Barron nodded gratefully but continued to digest the flurry of events. However, this epiphany wasn't the end. Rather, it marked the start of a dialogue about accountability, equality, and respect that would reverberate much beyond the terminal's gates. Melania and Barron were led to the lounge. The airline employees, who were now treading carefully, went out of their way to make sure they were comfortable as they waited for the next flight. Melania graciously declined offers of refreshments and priority boarding because, to her, this was about the idea rather than pay. "I wasn't prepared for all that," Barron said, breaking the hush as he sat across from her with his hands clasped in his lap. "It's difficult to remain composed in situations like that," Melania said, looking up from her phone with a softened expression. "I've dealt with stuff like this before, just not so public," Barron shrugged. The issue was that Melania leaned forward with her elbows resting on her knees. She asserted that nobody, including you, should have to grow accustomed to such unfair treatment. "Respect for me or someone nobody knows should never be based on appearance or last name." Barron nodded as his mother's words sank in. "You think they'll actually change anything after this?" she said, tilting her head thoughtfully. "Maybe not today, but moments like these add up, and sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to make others think twice before they act as they waited." Melania took out her phone and started texting. A few moments later, a tweet read, "Today, my son went through something that no one should have to go through. Being judged before being understood. This acts as a reminder to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their identity or origin. Respect is universal. Let's improve." The post immediately went viral, igniting internet debates about respect in public places, accountability, and bias. When it came time to board the flight, Barron and Melania walked to the gate together. The staff, who were now noticeably more accommodating, led them through without any problems as they settled into their seats. Melania looked at her son, who had already put on his headphones. Barron read through the responses, some of which were supportive, some of which were critical, but most of which echoed the sentiment that fairness and dignity should be non-negotiable. She smiled slightly as she looked out the window, considering the wider picture. This wasn't just about Barron. As the jet taxied down the runway, it was about everyone who had ever felt small, ignored, or undeserving. Times like this were chances to educate, advocate for change, and remind everyone that respect was a right rather than a privilege. Melania shut her eyes, her thoughts reliving the events of the day. Although it hadn't been an easy experience, she hoped that it would have a lasting effect on everyone who heard the story, not just the people involved, because sometimes the most profound lessons are learned in the face of hardship. And if this tale touched you, how we react can encourage others to put aside prejudice and embrace kindness. Give it to someone who might benefit from a reminder of the value of justice and respect. Together, let's change things one discussion at a time. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales that encourage introspection and transformation.